Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Yevamos Daf Yevamos 50. So we're going to start in the fifth chapter of Mesechet Yevamos, and the chapter is called Rebbe Gamliel, Parak Rebbe Gamliel. So says the Mishnah, Rebbe Gamliel taught, Ein get achar get. Rebbe Gamliel taught there is no such thing as a get after a get. Mimer achar mimer, and not mimer after mimer. What does this mean? There's no get after a get. So about this, we have to say, we have to go to Rashi. Rashi explains it. Rashi here, beautiful. Rashi says, what's the scenario where Gamliel is talking about that there's no get after a get? Let's say you have shtei Yevamos l'adam echad. Let's say you have two Yevamos. There's two women who fall to Yibum to one man. So shtei Yevamos l'adam echad, me'ach echad, from one brother. So two women from one who are married to Ruvain. Ruvain dies, and they both fall to Shimon. So v'nasan get wazu v'get wazu, and then then Shimon gives get to the first one, to Rachel, and then he gives us a get to a second one, i.e. to Sarah. So under those circumstances, Eino Oser B'Krovos Shnia. And under those circumstances, once you have given a get to somebody, she's prohibited for you to marry any of her relatives. But in this circumstance, the second woman who he gives the get to is already he's already not able to give her a divorce, because if he's divorced the first one, then he has no zika with the second one already. And the way Rashi explains it, if the first get was effective, the get that Shimon gave to, let's say, Rachel, hapaka zika de travayu, he's already severed the zika, the connection with both of them by dint of the first get. And ve'i kama loahani, then if the get is not effective, because you're supposed to do chalitza, you're not supposed to do a get. And if the get that he gives to the first one is not effective, if it does nothing, well then it's also not going to be effective to push off the latter one. So therefore, a get, Rebbe Gamliel says, there's no get after a get, because if the first one's effective, then you don't need a second one. And if the first one's not effective, then it's not going to be effective on the second one. And so too, mimer achar mimer. With mimer, we say that basically the same principle, but here it's not terminating the relationship like a get, but a mimer is the first step towards Yibum, and it's a rabbinic institution. So it's this betrothal. So let's say you do the mimer with the first woman, and the same scenario, if the mimer is effective, then there's nothing left for the second one. And if the mimer is not effective, if it doesn't do anything, then the second mimer also doesn't do anything. So that's where Gamliel says there's no get after get, there's no mimer achar mimer. Well, be'ilah achar be'ilah. So be'ilah is bia, is the marital intimacy, the sexual act which creates the yibum. So that's a biblical concept. That once you've done bia with one of the women who falls to yibum with you, then you already have nothing left to do with the second one. It terminates the zika of the second one. And just like yibum terminates the zika, also chalitza, which is the quasi divorce associated with yibum, it also terminates the relationship completely. So there's no bia after bia, and there's no chalitza after chalitza. The chachamim say, yesh get achar get. Chachamim say there is a get after the get. Chachamim say no, there is a get after get. What's the concept behind the Chachamim's position? The kama lodacha l'gamri. Chachamim say that there is a get after, even though you gave in the first woman a get, there's still going to be a get after when you give it to the second woman. It still has some potency to it. Why? Because we don't say that the first get, it's possible that it was effective, but it was partially effective, not completely effective. And so therefore, Rashi explains, there's still a partial zika, that because she requires chalitza. And so therefore, it also has an impact on the second woman. And so therefore, she's going to be considered his divorcee. She's going to be prohibited, and he's going to be prohibited to her relatives. So that's what the Chachamim's position is. Yesh get achar get, yesh maimer achar maimer, for the same principle. maybe it has a quasi impact, a partial impact. But everybody says yibum and chalitza completely terminates the zika with the other women. So if you give get after yibum with the first woman or chalitza, then it has zero impact. So the Gemara says Ketzad, and the Mishnah says Ketzad. What does this mean, Ketzad? So here Rashi says this word Ketzad, which means how so. This doesn't refer to the dispute between Rabbi Gamliel and the Rabbanan, but rather it's its own statement. And it refers to a case of one Yavam and one Yevama. And how can we have this case? How can we have how can she be permitted to marry in a situation where her Yavam did two actions? So that's the situation. Ketzad. Also, Maimer b'Yevamos. So let's say a man does Maimer with the woman who falls to Yibam with her, v'nasan laget, and then he gave her a divorce. Well, then, so we have one woman and one man. The Yavama falls to the Yavam. He does Maimer with her, which is a betrothal, and then he gives her a get. So she's still going to require a chalitza from him. Meaning to say, the get overturns the Maimer, but she still requires a chalitza or to terminate the relationship. But you cannot do a yibum under those circumstances because maybe the get was fully effective at the beginning, and then she's going to be included under the rubric of the prohibition or yivneh. And once you do chalitza with a woman, you're not allowed to go back and marry her. So therefore, if you did Maimer with your Yevama and then you gave her a get, you need to do with her a chalitza. Also, Maimer v'chalitza. Let's say he does Maimer and then he does chalitza with her, but get. She's still going to require a get. Why? Because the chalitza terminates the zika, but the Maimer might have been an effective marriage, and so therefore you're still going to require a get to get rid of the possible marriage that was created by the Maimer. Also, Maimer uval. Let's say he does Maimer and then he has Bia with her, and then the Mishnah says, Harezu mitzvah. Well, that's what you're supposed to do. That's the mitzvah. That before you do Yibum, the rabbi said you should do Maimer. Nasan get for us a Maimer. Let's say he gave her a get and then he did Maimer. Well, after he did the get, he still has some Zika left. And then he does a Maimer with her. Well, tzricha get v'chalitza. He's still going to require a get to get rid of the Maimer, but he also needs a chalitza to completely get rid of the Zika. Nasan get uval, let's say he gives her a get, and then he has Yibum, or then he has Bia with her. Well, so that's what's called a Bia Psula. That's a Bia that comes after a get, and that's going to be less effective. And so therefore, he's going to require a tzricha get. We force him to give her a divorce to terminate any possible relationship that had established from the bia, the chalitza, and then we do a chalitza in case the bia psula was not effective at making a marriage, and you need a chalitza to terminate the zika. Nasan get for cholatz. Let's say you gave her a get and then you did chalitza. Well, then ein achar chalitza klum. Once you do the chalitza under those circumstances, it's for sure terminated the zika, and then there's no problem, and so then she can marry anyone. Cholatz v'asa maimer. Let's say he did chalitza with her, and then he does maimer, or nasan get, or he gave her a get, uval, or he has bia with her. So he does chalitza, and then after the chalitza, he either does maimer, gave her a get, or has the bia, or Baal the Asar Maimer, or he did the Bia initially, and then he gave her a get, the Cholatz, then we say, Ein Achar Chalitza Klum. Once you do the Chalitza, the whole Zika relationship has ended, and there's nothing following the Chalitza. We're on the top of 50b. We're on top of 50b. So it says the Mishnah, Achas Yevama. So the Mishnah said these principles that we've been discussing They apply whether it's, we just said it all in the cases in our Mishnah, which was one widow falling to one of the to one brother. Achas Yevama, achas liyavam echad, achas shtei Yevamos liyavam echad. But they would also apply mutatis mutandis with two Yevamos to one Yavam, with two women, two co-wives who fell before one surviving brother. So now our Mishnah is going to show us how these cases would apply if there were two Yevamos who fell before one surviving brother. Ketzad asa maimer bezu, umaimer bezu. Let's say the surviving brother was he did mimer with this one, and he also did mimer with that one. So he did this betrothal to both of them. Tzrichos shnei gitin. So they both are going to require a get because we're not sure if it was indeed a valid betrothal. So therefore, tzrichos shnei gitin. The chalitza, and they're also going to require a chalitza, one chalitza to terminate any zika. Mimer bazu v'get lazu. Let's say he does mimer with this one and a get with this one. So tzricha get, the one we did the mimer with, is going to require a get. The chalitza, and you also require chalitza to terminate the zika. Mimer bazu ubawazu. Let's say you do mimer with this one, and then let's say you do mimer with this one, and then you do mimer with this one, ubawazu, and then you do, hold on one second, you do mimer with this one, and then the other one you do bia, so then tzrichos beis gitin, you require the two gitin to divorce, you require a get to divorce the first one who you did mimer with in case perhaps it was an effective betrothal, and also with the second one who you had bia with, you require a get because maybe the mimer was not effective, and now the bia consummated a marriage. So therefore you need two gitin, v'chalitza, and you also need a chalitza to terminate the relationship because maybe the bia was a bia psula, and so therefore you need a chalitza to end the zika. Maimer bazu v'chalatz lazu. Let's say you do maimer with this one, and let's say then you did chalitza with this one. So you did maimer with one, and then you did chalitza with the other one. Harishona tzricha get, the first one who had the maimer, she's going to require a get because maybe the mimer was effective. Get lazu v'get lazu. So let's say you gave both of them a get. Tzricho semenu chalitza. Then they're still going to require one chalitza because the get itself is not enough to terminate the zika. Get lazu uvawazu. Let's say you do a get with one, and then you did bia with the other one. So tzricha get, you're going to require a get for the bia because possibly it was effective, but also chalitza because it's called the bia psula, possibly the bia was not effective, so therefore you require a chalitza. Get lazu umamar bazu. Let's say you do a get with one and then mimer with the other one. Get lazu umamar bazu. Then under those circumstances, tzricha get v'chalitza. If you require a get for this one and a mimer for this one, then you require a get and a chalitza. Get lazu, mimer bazu. Let's say you require a get for this one and a mimer for this one. Hold on. You have to just go slowly to make sure you get the whole case. So you gave a get to one, and then you do a mimer for the other one. So then the one you did the mimer with, tzricha get, and you also need a chalitza to terminate the zika. Get lazu v'chalatz lazu. Let's say you did a get for one, and then you did a chalitza for the other one. Einachar chalitza klum. Once you do the chalitza, you terminated all zika. Chalatz v'chalatz. Let's say you did chalitza with both. Or chalatz v'asa mimer. You did chalitza, and then you did a mimer or nasan get. Or after the chalitza, you gave her a get, or baal, or you had the bia, or baal uva, or you did bia with one and then bia with the other one, or baal v'asa mimer. You did bia with one and then did the mimer, or nasan get, or after you did the bia, you gave her a get, the chalatz. Ein achar chalitza klum. We say there's nothing after the chalitza, and also we're saying that there's nothing after the bia tchila, after the bia started the relationship. Ben yavam echol shtei yevamos, ben shnei Yevamim Yevama achas. And this is all applies whether it is one Yavam with two women, with two Yevamos, or bein shnei Yevamim, or whether it's two brothers, Yevama achas, with one widow. Cholatz va'asa maimer. Let's say you do chalitza and then you did the maimer. After the chalitza, you did the betrothal, or nas and get uval. So cholatz and nas and maimer. Let's say you do the chalitza and then you do the maimer, or nas and get uval. Or let's say after you did the chalitza, you did a maimer, you gave a get, or you did bia. Oh, bal v'asa maimer. And nasan get b'chalatz, or let's say you did the bia initially, and then you did maimer, a get or chalitza. Inacha chalitza klum. There's nothing ever. The chalitza always terminates the zika. Doesn't matter bein betchila, bein be'emsa, bein b'sof, whether it's in the middle, the beginning, or the end. It always terminates the zika. Whereas the bia bizman shehi betchila, when the bia is initially einach klum, when the bia is the first act, and it terminates all the zika. However, be'emto b'sof, if the bia is after, in the middle and the end, i.e., if it's after the maimer or after the get, or then we're going to say be'emto b'sof yesh acharei klum. Then we're going to say that it's called the bia pesula. It's a less powerful bia, and then we have to be concerned about a maimer or a get that was done afterwards. Rabbi Nechemia says achas be'ila v'achas chalitza bein betchila bein be'emtza bein b'sof ein acharei klum. Rabbi Nechemia says it doesn't matter when you do the bia in the initial, the middle, and the end. It's always going to be considered powerful, effective to terminate all the other zikas, and so therefore there's always nothing after it. So Zakta Gemara says the Gemara Ad kan lo pligi ela beget achar get. When do we say that Rabbi Gamliel says there's no such thing as a get after a get? When do we say such a thing that Rabbi Gamliel says that? Okay, we're right after the Gemara. We're on top of 50b. When does the Gemara say that there's no such thing? When does the Gemara say this? Only by a case of when it's a get after a get. We say it's not effective, that it's not enough to prohibit the relatives to her or to him. Or maimer achar maimer. Then Rabbi Gamliel says if you're trying the first maimer after the second maimer, it's also not going to prohibit her relatives to him because it's not effective. And the reason why we said it was not effective, because if the first get was effective, then there's nothing left. There's no zika. And if we say the first get was not effective, then the second get is also not effective. But says the Gemara, forget echad biyavama umamar echad biyavama. But if it would be a get followed by a maimer, then umaimer echad get echad biyavama umaimer echad biyavama. Then it's mahani. If he gives one get to one yavama and a maimer to the other one, then it is going to be effective, because we can't apply the same logic to say there's no maimer echad get, because maybe the get was not effective, but the maimer was effective. My time, what's the reasoning? My time, Amar Rabbanan get b'yavama mahani. What's the reason why the rabbis say that a get by a yavama might be effective? Mishum de mahani ba'alma, because in general, a get is an effective way of terminating a relationship. The Amar Sol mahani, and if you would say that maybe it's not going to be effective, Amri get lotzia v'chalitza lotzia. Then we have to be concerned that people might say that the get is a useful tool to terminate a relationship, and also chalitza is a useful tool to terminate a relationship. Umi the get lo mahani, chalitza nami lo mahani, and we might say, well, since the get doesn't terminate it, also chalitza didn't terminate it. And then it might lead to the bia after the chalitza, and that would be, of course, a biblical prohibition. So therefore, we say that for this reason, we say that the get is going to be, we have to be concerned about a get that was given. And why did the rabbi say we have to be concerned about a maimer done to a yavama? Because even though it never in the Torah says anything about a maimer for yavama, it says yibum or chalitza. So why do we have to be concerned about it and say that if you do mimer with the woman that her relatives are prohibited to you, what's the and she requires a get? Mishum demahani ba'alma, because in general, mimer, which is with kesef or with shtar, is an effective way of doing a marriage, a betrothal. The if you would say it doesn't work, amri mimer liknos ubio liknos, we would say that mimer is effective at a betrothal, and so is yibum. From the fact that we say that the mimer is not effective in this circumstance, we might say bia nami lamahani. We might also say the bia is also not effective. And then we might come to have bia achar bia, and that's also he did bia with one woman, and then he did bia with the co-wife, and that's a sin. My tamar rabbanan bia psua yesh acharakum. And why did the rabbi say that if it was a bia that was not completely effective, bia psua, that afterwards, if you do mimer or get, that it is effective after that? Why do they say that? So, Amri, because they say I bia achar get, I bia achar ageti, then because the rabbis explain, it's as follows: if the concern is bia achar get, if the concern is about the bia after the get, kizera bia achar get, then our concern is that you might kizera bia achar get mishum bia achar chalitza. You might come to say, well, if you're going to allow bia after the get, if you're going to allow yibum after the get, then you might come to allow yibum after the chalitza. And if the concern is about a case of bia after you did mimer, because they were bia achar mimer mishum bia achar bia. We're concerned if you're going to allow bia after you did mimer with one woman and then you did bia with the other, then you might come to have bia with one woman after you have bia with the other woman. And why did the rabbi say when it comes to chalitza psua, to this chalitza that is also being done after you do get or mimer, that why did the rabbi say that chalitza is completely effective, unlike the bia, which is not effective? Then that chalitza will terminate the zika. What's the reason why the Chachamim say that? Gemara explains. Amri, because what's our concern? My ligzor, what would we make a decree about? Nigzor chalitza achar a get, mishum chalitza achar chalitza. If we're going to say that a chalitza after a get is not effective, because then you might require a chalitza after an initial chalitza. Kol kiani tichotz v'tezel. We don't care if you do extra chalitzas; it's not going to be a problem. And ligzor chalitza achar maimer mishum chalitza achar bia. And if you want to say we're going to prohibit the chalitza after the maimer, because then you might come to do chalitza after the bia. Atu chalitza achar maimer milo. So, because then you might come to do the chalitza achar. So Ami Maligzor or Nigzor chalitza achar get mishum chalitza achar chalitza kolkiani tichotz v'nezel. And if you're going to say ligzor chalitza achar maimer, if you're going to say let's make a decree that it's not effective if you do the chalitza after the maimer, mishum chalitza achar bia. If you want to say that the chalitza after maimer is not effective, because then you might require chalitza after the bia. Atu chalitza achar maimer, milo by get lamamaro. You're not going to do that because once you've done the chalitza after the maimer, we still will require a get for the mimer, and so therefore, and we won't say that you don't need anything. So therefore, chalitza achar bia nami bai get lebiasa. So we'd also require, if you had bia, we would also require a get, and the chalitza then wouldn't be effective. So that's the Gemara's explanation of all these situations. And of course, these cases are not difficult. You just have to, the concepts are not hard. You just have to understand the exact scenario. Happy to address any questions here. Any questions?